Agenda, we have our welcome. I'll give a little background on how we got here, how this task force was formed, why we were formed, and then we'll have some opening remarks from co-chair CEO David Gaddis from DC Water. We will have some time to talk about our FY24 budget timeline and approach. We'll also have our final vote of batch one, the action plans, and we'll talk about how those public comments were incorporated, and then we'll have that final vote from the voting members. We'll go over the consent vote for batch two action plans for public review and comment. That's a different process where we allow for the public to then review everything that's been moved along to continue with our action plans. And then we'll do a presentation of our batch three action plans, which will be our last round of action plans before our final report. Then we will close out the meeting with closing remarks from Director Tommy Wells from DOEE. And we will have some next steps and maybe a little bit of homework, and our meeting will end then. So we have about 2 hours of full conversation, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue forward. So the Flood Task Force was established by the city administrator in September 2021. This task force reports to the Deputy Mayor of Operations and Infrastructure, that's Deputy Mayor Lucinda Babers, and it's co-chaired by DC Water's CEO David Gaddis and Director Tommy Wells of DOEE. The first meeting was kicked off in November of 2021 with our full flood task force. We have 13 members of the task force that are from DC government agencies and 16 consulting members that are from the federal and private sector. Our final report for the flood task force deadline has been adjusted to February of 2023, which is a new deadline. We also have meetings that are all published on our website. Everything is public for the public to participate and add comments and feedback. The task force meetings and the action team meetings are posted there in terms of the schedule. We also have other resources available on that website, and they are at dcfloodtaskforce.org. We have had some separate public listening sessions, and that happened in March of 2022. We had great public input, and we continue to make sure that the public is aware and available to hear and follow along. Next slide, please. So we have two action teams to break up our work, and we cover 9 categories. The first action team is the residential resilience. We cover categories 1 through 4, and the governance and coordination has been covering categories 5 through 9. Next slide. The task force timeline has been pretty busy. We meet regularly, and we are now in the September meeting, so we've had months and months of time to coordinate and discuss and formulate these action plans. Next slide. So the task force schedule that we've had so far has been the full task force meets every other month on the 3rd Wednesday. Our next full task force meeting will be on Wednesday, November 16th. The action teams meet every month. Residential resilience is on the 2nd Tuesdays of the month. Governance and coordination is on the 2nd Friday of the month. Our flood task force final report, like I said, has been adjusted to February of 2023, and all the action plans will cover the 9 categories that were noted before. After we have our final report submitted and discussed, we will have some annual meetings to track the progress of the action plan and also to continue to discuss the budgeting priorities for our action plans. Next slide. So with that, you're all caught up. And now I'd like to introduce CEO David Gaddis from DC Water to deliver some opening remarks. Mr. Gaddis.
Thank you very much, Monty. And good afternoon, everyone. First, I just want to thank all of you for your commitment. Monty went through a number of things and his true commitment to this and this important work that is being performed on behalf of the residents, the businesses, and the owners of those businesses and the District of Columbia. As I said at the beginning last November, when we launched this effort, it's going to take a village to truly find real solutions to the persistent flooding issues the district has experienced over the years. Recent storms have reminded us that this is very much a today problem. Now, we're not talking about a future or a past. This is a true today problem that we have today with these intense, impactful storms that come about, including climate change. We know from the recent engagement of various stakeholders with the task force that many people are invested in the work that you are doing and interested in the outcomes as well. We are now finalizing the action plans and the recommendations to make the district more flood resilient. Of course, an important piece of this work is ensuring we uncover every dollar available of funding to us and to execute these recommendations as well. We all know that the district government will be embarking on its budget cycle, and as co-chair, I support every measure to ensure some of these recommendations are part of this budget process as we move forward. I firmly believe that the federal government has a role to play here as well. Just this morning, I testified on Capitol Hill before the House Committee on Homeland Security at the hearing on water and infrastructure preparedness and resiliency as well. I told the committee members this morning that the funds for water investment are distributed from the Biden administration's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we must be sure that these resources are distributed on an equitable basis to all communities, on a true equitable basis. I also asked them to continue their commitment to grow this water infrastructure funding, as there is still much work to be done. And again, one of our most pressing needs here in the district is funding to address flooding. Finally, I want to thank Director Wells for his for being great partners with many of his staff doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes and to keep things on track. And I want to thank also my team at DC Water as well for being
CEO Gaddis, I'm so sorry we're losing you. So I'm sure you said wonderful things, and we know you're always so gracious, and your team is working. I will say your team is fantastic, and they've given a lot of time to this. So I will
I'm
thank
sorry
them
about
for
that.
you. Oh, great, you're back. Good.
Oh, I don't even know what you heard and what you didn't hear, but I will end by saying this. I did I don't know if you heard me thank DOE Director Wells for his collaboration and working with me. And lastly, what I wanted to say was I want to thank Deputy Mayor Lucinda Babers and Mayor Bowser for her and allowing this task force to go forward, and City Administrator Kevin Donahue for his support and attention on this important effort as well. So I'll stop there before I fade out again. Monty, thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you, CEO Gaddis. We appreciate you and your time. We know you've had a very busy day with dignitaries and your hearing, so we appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we will move forward with our schedule because we have so much to talk about. Meredith Upchurch from DOEE is going to talk about the budget timeline and approach. Meredith?
Yes, thank you, Monty. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, let's talk FY24 budget preparation. You could go to that slide, thank you. So first, a refresher or information for those who are not familiar with the district budget planning cycle. We are about to switch over to FY23. We're currently in FY22. October 1st, we'll switch to FY23. And we are starting the FY24 budget planning process now. So the general, very rough timeline is that agencies prepare their budget in the October to November timeframe, so that's this fall. Those requests get sent to the mayor's office and the office of budget, who work on them and adjust and revise through the winter timeframe. Then that budget gets sent to council. The mayor officially proposes that budget to council in the spring. And by the summertime, the budget is finalized. So that means we have to get all of our FY24 budget requests prepared and submitted within the next 2 months. So the approach we're taking for the flood task force is that, first of all, each agency is still responsible for all of its own budget requests, whether it's related to the flood task force or not. We want to be able to consolidate these projects as essentially a slate of projects that the task force is putting forward out of the task force to request budget support. And our goal is that by showing that these projects have the support of the task force, that their priority will be raised within the budget review process. So for timelines, I have don't switch slides yet, but on the next slide, I do have a starting list of projects. But our goal is that for the November meeting, the November task force meeting, we will have that slate of projects prepared with responsible agency and amounts and perhaps a few other details for the task force to vote. So with that, why don't we go to the next slide? So here's our preliminary list of projects that would be a part of FY24 or would have budget requests in FY24. This is not an all-inclusive list at this time, but we have been pulling information from all the action plans that have been prepared by many agencies. And we've got about half of those action plans drafted. We're still waiting to see quite a few more that will be done by later this week. So just to give you an idea of what the task force agencies are working on and will be asking for money for in FY24. For example, some of the new projects are stormwater damage remediation grants. That's part of the insurance program. Backwater valve program that DC Water's leading. A resilience study in 1 to 2 neighborhoods. And Peace Street levee closure contractor. So you'll hear more about some of these efforts today in the briefings. And then we've also got some continuing projects like the integrated flood model, Flood Smart Homes, Southwest Blue-Green infrastructure, Watts Branch flood mitigation designs, installation of flood signs and sensors, and community outreach. So again, this is not an all-inclusive list. I know DDOT has a number of projects that probably would need to be added to this list. DGS as well, DPR, DPW, DC Water. So yeah, so our request at this point is for agencies to make sure that you let us know if you are doing a specific budget enhancement request, capital request, whatever it may be, so that we can include it in our slate of task force projects and make sure that the action plans also reflect what budget's needed to complete the action plans. So this covers what we have at this point for FY24 budget planning. Are there any questions?
Maybe I can just add a little bit, Meredith. I think we're starting off this conversation today with the budget because I think that's one of the most important things that comes out of this task force is that the projects and the actions that we've identified also have a way to get funded. And I think hopefully we're being clear that the task force does not have its own budget. It doesn't work like that. So all of these projects, like for example, the integrated flood model project, that's something that DOEE needs to put in DOEE's budget request that then goes up, up the chain to our deputy mayor and then up to the mayor. And I think what we're trying to say is please use the flood task force as, highlighting that your project is supported by the task force, supported by these action plans, they can help you prioritize this budget or prioritize a project within your budget, and then we can let the deputy mayors know that these specific projects are part of the flood task force. And from there, we don't it's kind of up to higher level folks to decide what happens, but I think at the very least for the task force, we can help elevate the projects that have come out of the discussions here. So I think that's really the goal. And by the end of today, you, the full task force, will have heard all of the action plans that we are going to be proposing. So they're in 3 batches, various stages of, either full public comment already or about to go to public comment, or like today you'll be hearing for the first time. But this was kind of our goal, is to get all of this in front of you, right before kind of the budget season starts, and that we've identified all the things that need to be done or included in the budget, and that you can point to the task force when you make your request. So I think Meredith said most of that already. I just wanted to kind of reiterate some of those points.
Thanks, Nick. Good emphasis.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we go into action plan voting?
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Meredith and Nick. We appreciate that. Again, using the flood task force and your association is really important in the budget process. So please, please, please get those in. So we are I'm going to introduce Barbara Mitchell from DC Water to talk about to go through our voting process. And I also wanted to just take a moment to check. There's a Brent on the line. Brent, are you from DPR? Just need to make sure, because we're establishing our quorum and we actually need to know.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. This is Brent from DPR.
Great, wonderful. I appreciate that. So I will, Barbara, we do have a quorum, just so you don't even have to ask me. You do have one now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Monash, and thank you again, Task Force. You may recall that I am Barbara Mitchell, Assistant General Counsel at DC Water in the Department of Government and Legal Affairs. I will again facilitate today's vote for the task force, and thank you, Monty, for establishing that we do have a quorum. On today's agenda, we will consider 2 votes. Members will recall that at the last meeting of the full task force, you voted to approve the action team plans for public comment and review. Today, members will consider those same action plans for final approval. We will refer to that vote as Batch 1. Batch 2 consists of the action plans approved by the various action teams and will be considered and voted on today to be published on the Flood Task Force website for public comment. Members, I'd like to turn your attention to the consent agenda as presented on the screen. For the purposes of the record and those who did not join us at our last full task force meeting, I should note that the consent agenda enables members to vote on a group of items in block without discussion. In a few moments, directors or their designees will be able to register their virtual roll call vote by typing yes to approve the measures, no to disapprove the measures, or abstain to abstain from the vote in the chat. Voting members, you have the consent agenda properly before you as amended by public comment. The action plans on the consent agenda are as follows. 3.1, develop program to flood-proof homes and provide resilience upgrades. 6.1, update DOEE flood hazard rules. 7.3, use results of 2020 USACE modeling to update Watts Branch FEMA maps. 7.4, use results of 2019 USACE modeling to update Oxen Run FEMA maps. 8.4, conduct yearly interagency outreach. And please note that Action Plan 6.3, Pass DC B24-0410 Flood Resilience Act is official law now, as it has completed passive congressional review last month. As previously stated, the plans included in Batch 1 have been reviewed by the public after they were published on the Flood Task Force website. The approval process and timeline is shown here on your screen. Additionally, we did receive comments from the public, which my colleague Nick will provide or briefly speak to. Nick?
Yeah, Barbara. Yeah, I just mentioned that we received 4 comments, 2 from kind of organizations and 2 from residents that we were able to incorporate into all of the action plans. And I think so. I guess last Friday there was an email sent out that included like a track changes version of what was different from the action plans that you voted to release the public comment versus the action plans that were here today. So you can you can always you can refer to that, but and we'll make the public comments available on the website as well.
Nick, just so I understand the public comment process, the basis for public comments was voluntary comments based at looking at the flood website, or
Right.
as opposed to some sort of mass dissemination?
Yeah. No, there was. We did put quite a bit of effort into getting the word out. There's a couple of different email listservs that we posted,
Okay.
and we also, I'm trying to think of email listservs, but also like we've been working in cases like in Ward 6 and 7 and 8. There's a group of folks that we have been frequently interacting on other flood issues, and we try and make sure that they had a chance to see these too. So we did try and get the word out in addition to posting on the website.
Okay.
Nick, I'd like to offer, we also sent it out to a number of folks from on the ANC side, as well as other community organizational, contacts that we have from our outreach team. So we've sent it out far and wide. And I see that Dr. Hewitt is on the line. Dr. Hewitt, if you have any comments, I think that, if there's something that we can do to post things through your efforts, we'd love to do that as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, happy to amplify the work that's been done through our channels, and feel free to back channel me on the most appropriate way to move forward on that.
Great, we'll do that. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Barbara, for that process, and we'll go ahead and move forward, Barbara, with your vote.
Absolutely. Members, you have heard the list of action plans to be considered, the public comments to those action plans, and any changes made to the action plans thereafter. Is there any objection to the consent agenda as presented? More specifically, would any member like to remove an item from the consent agenda to be reviewed and discussed individually? All right, hearing and seeing no objection to the consent agenda as presented, the task force is now considering it as listed and presented on the screen, with leave for staff to make grammatical and minor editorial changes. Voting members seeking to approve the consent agenda, please signify by typing yes in the chat. Those opposed, no in the chat. And those abstaining, please type abstain. We will give you 1 minute to vote and for our team to tally the vote. Members experiencing technical difficulties, you may unmute yourself and vote that way. Please begin voting now.
We're having troubles with the timer, but we are keeping the time on this. And so you have about 25 seconds left. Thank you. Barbara, we have a unanimous vote of the members that are attending today. So thank you so much for voting, everyone.
Thank you. So we're on to batch 2. Thank you. Voting members, you have the consent agenda for batch 2 properly before you as recommended by the various action teams. The action plans on the consent agenda are as follows. 4.1, expand backwater valve installation program. 4.3, require backwater valve installation in codes. 5.1, develop an annual list of capital projects. 6.8, amend real property disclosure rules to include backwater valve drainage complaints. 8.1, update DC Silver Jackets MOU to include all participating district agencies as signatories. And 9.3, install flashing warning signs at oft flooded intersections. As you can see on your screen, the action plans will be published. If we can advance, it looks like. There we go. As you can see on your screen, the action plans will be published like so on our website, dcfloodtaskforce.org. Members, you have heard the list of action plans to be considered for vote today and thereafter published on the Flood Task Force website for formal public comment and review. Is there any objection to the consent agenda as presented? Hearing and seeing no objection, the task force is now considering the consent agenda as listed and presented on your screen. Voting members seeking to approve the consent agenda, please signify by typing yes, opposed, type no, abstain, please type abstain in the chat. We will give you 1 minute to vote and our team will tally the votes. Members experiencing technical difficulties can vote by unmuting your microphone. Please begin voting now. All right, this concludes the voting. Well, first we have to tally the votes. I apologize. Ms. Monash, do we have our tally now?
Hold on, we're just waiting for 1 or 2 more. Hold on, please.
Okay.
The vote has been approved. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for participating. All right, next slide, please, Nick. All right, so we're gonna now go through our presentation of batch 3 action plans. This is where we have a lot of time allotted. We have about 75 minutes, so we will have several presentations by different action team members or Flood Task Force members. Nick Bonard will be the host of this. So Nick, if you want to join us and facilitate this section of our meeting. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Monty. And just a real quick note for Cell, I noticed that in the last DCBIA newsletter letter that you put in a survey about basement, helping with basement and flooding, which was awesome. Maybe we could have a similar note the next time you send a newsletter to comment on the action plans that were just released, just to get the word out a little bit more. But we can talk
Sure.
offline about that.
Yeah, it's doable.
Great. Okay, so our task in the next next amount of time here is you guys are going to hear presentations on 15 different action plans, which rounds out all of the action plans that the task force is going to do and include in a final report to the city administrator. So just to give you an overview, I've put them all on 2 slides here. So this first slide are the action plans that are coming out of residential resilience. The first, let's see, first 5 I think here are related to flood insurance, so we'll hear about those. And then the last 2 are local workforce, and then also seeing if we can make it safer for residents that are living in basements. So if you go to the next slide, these are the action plans that are coming out of the governance and coordination action team. And so they include various things about improving collaboration and floodplain review processes, both interdistrict and federal and district. A little bit about interior flooding mapping and drainage complaints associated with that. We've got an update on the P Street levee closure, and then a couple at the end for HSEMA on emergency response, flood reporting, and severe weather warning. So we're gonna hear from all of these. We're trying to keep it 5 minutes or less. So yeah, we'll just get right to it. So I will start with talking about the first action plan on the list. This is whether or not DC should join FEMA's Community Rating System program. This would be led by DOEE. And if you go to the next slide, essentially, if we decide to implement this, what it would do, it would reduce insurance premiums. So the community rating system is kind of like LEED certification, but instead of buildings, it's for entire communities. And instead of getting a gold or a platinum or whatever, you get insurance premium reductions. They have a whole giant PDF document explaining how you can earn points. And just as a few examples, if your community adopts higher regulatory standards, for example, you say everyone has to build to the 100-year plus 2, you get a certain number of points. If you say everybody builds to the 100-year plus 3 or 4 or 5, you get even more points. Other examples that you can do as a community are, you can do more outreach projects that specifically discuss FEMA's designated priority topics, which are usually pretty closely in alignment with what we would want to talk about anyway in terms of floodplain management. And then another example is the more properties you acquire and buy out, and therefore removing buildings from the floodplain, you get more points and therefore a greater reduction insurance premiums. So just based on a very high level initial analysis, it seems like the district has enough points to be a class 7 out of 10, and 1 would be the best. But if we just signed up right now, we could probably get to a class 7, which would be a savings of about $130,000 district-wide across all policyholders. And that also, thinking of it another way, it's about an average savings of $388 per year per policyholder. So if you go to the next slide, where our goal for this action plan is to set kind of a timeline of research that DOEE and partners need to do, and then ultimately presenting findings to the task force, and then deciding whether we want to pursue this path. So we don't. This action plan isn't as written right now, is not saying yes, 100% we are going to be part of the CRS program. It's saying that we need to evaluate, and there's going to be a process for us to evaluate and then eventually vote on it. But we do know enough to kind of have a general sense of what it might take, both in terms of timeline and cost. And So in terms of entitlement, if we decided today that we wanted to be a part of the CRS program, we probably wouldn't be, officially accepted and have reduced rates for homeowners until 2026. And as far as cost goes, it would require at least one staff member at DOE in perpetuity in order to, advance the district's efforts in getting a higher score, but also to coordinate and do all the reporting that would be required for the CRS program, which is an annual recertification process, involves quite a bit of paperwork and like I said, coordination. That's just the DOE side. Another thing to point out here is, so there's the full-time staff member, then also there's probably going to be one-time costs to implement new features that will help us get a higher score. And then, importantly, that something we have to discuss amongst agencies is that there is going to be significant, what we're saying, in-kind effort from other agencies. We're going to need help getting information from DCRA, from DASB, from HCEMA in order to report that back to FEMA. And the consequence if we don't report that information is that we'll lose the CRS status, and then folks that have relied on the insurance discount aren't going to get it anymore. So there's so it's something to think about, and we'll try and present all the things that folks need to be doing as we meet again to ultimately make a decision on this process. So that is action plan 1.5. And now I'm going to pass it to my colleagues at DISB to take us through the next few action plans.
Yeah, appreciate that, Nick. Phil Edmonds from the Department of Insurance, Securities and Banking. And DISB is presenting 5 proposals for your consideration. The first being 1.6. This is an outreach and education program where DISB would be the lead agency. Purpose is to conduct outreach to increase the number of flood insurance coverage in the district by district residents. So if you go to the next slide. This particular program would entail collaborations with other agencies and stakeholders to promote informational and educational materials. Again, the purpose would be to increase the number of flood policies and water coverage enhancements to homeowners and renters policies. In regards to the budget, I don't think we'll be asking for any additional money to run the program. It will be from existing budget in FY 2023 and FY 2024. And the equity component is to really educate and empower all residents as it relates to what's available in flood policies and additional water damage coverage riders. So that's it in regards to 1.6. Go to the next slide. The next 2 proposals are remediation programs, 1.7 and 1.7B, 1.7A and 1.7B. The lead agency on these 2 remediation programs is DISB. Action Plan 1.7A is a storm damage remediation grant program for income eligible residents only. So it's only for those that meet a certain criteria, and it's a grant program. So if you go to the next slide. Some of the specifics of the program. The payout for this particular program for those who meet the criteria are between $1,000 and $6,000 of remedial payments. The payments would be made within 24 or 48 hours, between 24 and 48 hours of when damage occurs and the resident lets us know that the damage has occurred to their property. The concept for this particular program was borrowed heavily from 2 places, Rockville, Maryland, and Alexandria, Virginia. We also took some aspects from Baltimore and Massachusetts. We did an initial budget projection, and it looked like the entire program would be somewhere under 450,000, specifically $416,000. We estimated that 104 claims would be paid out in the first year. Again, this is a coupon and reimbursement system, which means if you don't have money up front to pay for vendor services, you would receive a coupon. That coupon will allow you to obtain certain services from specific identified vendors. If you did have enough money up front to pay for that type of service up front, you would seek reimbursement through a reimbursement system that would be a setup. The equity component of this is the program would be available to all low-income claimants throughout the 8 wards, and there be certain protections built in for the district program administrator. What I mean by that is hold harmless provisions if you entered the program. So I think that's a high level of how 1.7A would look. 1.7B is also a damage payment through group insurance. The lead agency is DSB again. This is a storm damage remediation program again. But the payments are not made through the government. They're made through a group insurance policy. So if you go to the next slide, some of the critical components of this is DSB would contract with a property and casualty insurer who would issue a master policy. It would be eligible for only low-income residents based on certain criteria that they would have to meet, and they in turn would receive a certificate of coverage. The coverage amount would be maxed out at $10,000 to be coordinated with the maximum of the NFIP deductible. The program would work in 2 ways: an immediate payment of $2,000 payable upon a determination of water damage, and then additional payouts based on the damage that that particular homeowner or renter sustained during an event. The equity component, again, is coverage to all low-income households in all wards with 100% of the premiums paid by the district. The budget determination would have to be determined at a later time based on an actuarial review. And that's it for the high level for 1.7. If you go to the next slide, 1.9A, that's the enhanced program coverage. Home insurance, water damage mitigation credits, and premium discounts. So if you go to the next slide, I'll talk about some of the high-level features of the 1.9A program. Insurers providing homeowners or renters insurance would be required to provide a water damage intrusion mitigation credit or premium discount. This would make available premium discounts when one or more of the following devices have been verified to have been installed in a home. And 3 things are listed. Obviously, you see water shutoff devices, water leak sensors, and backflow devices. We've included other features of the program, not just these 3, but these are the 3 most critical. Budget projections, there's no additional expense for district government, and the equity provides opportunity for all district residents to experience some type of savings based on adding certain features to the home. If you go to the next slide, that's program 1.9B. This is the last program that's led by DSB. It's an enhanced water damage coverage for all people who have homeowners policies in the district. If you go to the next slide, the high level overview. DSB will establish a requirement for insurers offering homeowners and renters coverage. And it makes it available through endorsements, certain water damage enhancements, if they are not included in the policy. So we're requiring insurers to make these type of provisions available to homeowners and renters. It would be provided to each applicant at the time of purchase with an opt-in provision for each enhancement along with the cost. So you would know up front what the cost is and what you're specifically purchasing. We would make it clear up front as well. We would require the insurers to make clear that these enhancements are not a substitute for flood coverage. So in regards to budget projections, there's no additional expense for the district government. There will be a significant, I would think, expense for insurers operating in the district. And the equity component is it provides an opportunity for all district residents throughout the 8 wards to experience expanded coverage. So that's a high-level review of the 5 proposals we're putting forth for your consideration. That's it. Back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Right. And okay, so now, yeah, I guess we can pass it to, I think this is Salil from the DC Water team. Give us an overview of what will be in the action plan for 2.2.
Thank you, Nick. So the local workforce for repairs is tied very much with the previous discussion on the flood task force because it does require a core business grouping of work for them to be able to do this. We can organize resources within the district, train people. The issue is always going to be, once they're trained, where do they work? So if we talk to, there's about 16 businesses within this area that deal with cleaning up after a flood. And for them to sign on to a program such as this, there needs to be some assurance that there's going to be work coming up. So that ties in very well with the insurance discussion we had prior to this, that provides some level of certainty. Next one is, so this is lessons learned from Hurricane Ida that came through here last year and resulted in, we were fortunate, it missed us, but it resulted in 43 fatalities between Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Several of them related to trapping residents in basements. I believe Maryland had 1 fatality related to that. So we have not been able to find any records in the district. So we've been very fortunate that we've not had a storm in areas that have a significant amount of basement dwelling apartments. So one of the issues with basement apartments, the regulations in place at present are there for a risk that's most likely to occur, which is fire. And that's correctly so. But what the fire-based risk provisions also do is make it harder to exit in case the home is filled with water. The best approach to protecting residents is going to be building in information for maybe renters through their policy, rental policy, that they're made aware of it. Okay. So I thought you had to jump in, but all right. Getting the information out about the risks in case of a storm, and possibly providing some alarming if there's water building up. This is a first step in here is going to be identifying areas of the city that could flood to the level that will impact basement dwelling. One of the first steps out here is going to be identifying those areas of the city that are at risk. And then developing a public education program, followed by building it into the rental agreements that the basement dwelling units are made aware of this risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Salil. All right, so now this starts the section on governance and coordination action plans. But I'm thinking maybe it's a good chance to just pause for a second to see if there was any comments or questions or feedback on the action plans that were just presented. And while I'm waiting to see if anybody has wants to speak up, I'll just mention that again, the plan is later this week that we will send out Word document versions of these action plans that you are seeing. We'll send them out to all of the task force members, and then you'll have about a month to comment, make track changes, and then we'll be able to edit from there. So you don't have to get all of your comments and questions in now, but certainly if there's something that didn't make sense or you're wondering how it all fits in, this would be a great time to ask. All right. Well, I will carry on then. And so I'm going to give you updates on Action Plan 6.6, which is some process improvements for floodplain review. This is something that will be led jointly by DOE and DCRA. If you go to the next slide. Some of you may not know that that the process for reviewing permits in floodplains is a joint responsibility. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. Joint responsibility between DCRA and DOE. So just as a quick example, anytime you are submitting a permit, you're submitting it to DCRA, so they intake the permits, and then if it's in a floodplain, they send those permits to DOE for us to review based on the flood hazard rules. So we do our review, and then once we approve, it goes back to DCRA and it continues through the construction permitting workflow there. And DCRA has responsibility to inspect and enforce the flood hazard rules and the flood hazard provisions in the construction codes. So there's a lot of back and forth coordination, and we need to make some updates in that process. We need both additional staff and some software upgrades to make sure that we're getting all the permits that we need to be getting that are in the floodplain, and that the permits are being stopped at the appropriate places for review of elevation certificates. And we also need to make sure that DCRA has enough staff to do the inspection and processing of certificate of occupancies that are kind of required as part of the standard floodplain management review. So if you go to the next slide, just as far as implementation, this would be applied broadly across the entire district. So it'll just help all buildings and all neighborhoods to be resilient. The timeline for this is, if we can identify funding, we can do some upgrades to the system software in 2023. And then in 2024 and beyond, we'll need money for, additional staff and capacity and do training every year after that. As far as budget, we're estimating about $200,000 to do the software upgrades that needs to be done, and then about $150,000 to cover a full-time staff person at DCRA to make sure that we're meeting all of the requirements that we're supposed to do as participants in FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. All right, so switching to the next one. This is another DOE action plan. This is to improve federal and district collaboration on floodplain management. If you go to the next slide. So the district and federal agencies have different floodplain management standards, and that's not by itself a problem, but it can lead to some issues because there's private property which are regulated by the district floodplain regulations sitting right next to federal land, which is governed by a different set of regulations. So you can have a weird circumstance where one property is protecting themselves to a 15-foot flood and another, right next door, the regulations only require, 14 feet of protection. And so, really, it's the weakest link protection. And so that kind of coordination is necessary to make sure that that everybody's being as protected as possible. So we've worked with staff at NCPC to come up with a few ideas to just help make sure we are doing the best we can as far as coordinating. And we've already actually implemented a lot of solutions already. For example, DOE and other district agencies are part of NCPC's review process. But some other things that we can do, sharing data and models that are developed. Another one is coordinating on project review and as new regulatory standards are developed. Right now, the federal government, the federal agencies are kind of updating their floodplain management standards. So I think keeping DOE in the loop and on what's happening there, and us keeping the federal agencies in the loop on any updates to our floodplain regulations would be a good thing. And then we're also suggesting that every year or so there'll be interagency staff briefings where we can learn about these new regulatory standards and any projects that might be impacting federal or district or private land related to flooding. So this is something that would just be done with staff time, and starting really in FY23, we can start working on this. All right, and the next one on interior flooding areas, this is also a DOE plan. I'm gonna pass it to Meredith to go over this one.
Hello, everybody. We will talk a bit about interior flooding now and efforts to get a better understanding, location identifying where the interior flooding occurs.
Meredith, before you start, can you just
Sure.
distinguish how this differs from the integrative flood modeling?
Yes, I will talk about that. Let me get to the next slide, and we've got that on there. So this is related to the integrated flood model. Good lead in, Sel. So many of you are familiar with the integrated flood model effort, which is a large effort to create models that tie together the riverine, coastal, tidal, and interior flooding together so that we can simulate many different scenarios of both known storms and unknown time-wise high-intensity storms to see where flooding occurs. So the integrated flood model, that contract was awarded earlier this year. That project has started, but it is a multi-year project. So what we are looking for here is a short-term solution. And what we can do with this short-term solution, our goal is really to make sure that we know where interior flooding is occurring based on our just historical data that various agencies have collected. And if there are projects that are coming through or any activity that is happening in those locations, we can properly work with those projects to let them know they are in a known flooding area and they should take precautions in the development, the design of the building to protect themselves from flooding. So this is just a short-term interim measure while the integrated flood model is in development. So what we're trying to work toward is a centralized mapping system, reporting, tracking system. We haven't quite narrowed down exactly what that's going to be, but a way to contain that historical data and also to map any data as it comes in for flooding locations. Next slide. And the key area here is to know where those areas are. Yes, go ahead, Sel.
Sorry, Meredith, it's EJ.
EJ, okay.
Yeah. Would this be housed with DOE, the database?
It would be a
where
it would be accessible. Yeah, I think it's going to be housed at DOE and accessible to agencies. We don't believe we can make it public because we have to deal with some security sensitivity of the data at this point. But yes, it'll be for agency use,
Okay, we'll discuss.
primarily for
Thanks.
project and permit review.
EJ, were you talking about the permit flagging or the centralized complaint?
This the centralized complaint stuff. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't think yeah, I mean, it could be a DOE, it could be an Octo thing. Yeah, basically, it's definitely something we need to talk about.
Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah, amongst agencies, but the intention is that, like Meredith said, it would, like any agency, DC Water, DDOT, DOE could, log in and add an entry.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very
yeah.
important thing. It goes along with the drainage committee work that would follow. So it's a very good thing. Yep. Okay.
Yes, so this action plan also does include parts of the integrated flood model. We have identified that there is additional funding needed to complete the integrated flood model, and then we think a small amount of money to work on this interim database. Yeah, the goal is to get this interim database ready to go within a year. So, and this is really in response to a lot of public concerns we have heard about interior flooding and making sure these areas are getting the attention that's needed.
Was the thought to add in additional GIS resources to help with mapping, this mapping exercise?
Nick, what do you think?
You're talking about the 150,000?
Yeah, because
The-
essentially,
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, what is y'all? Do y'all have a email address for all y'all that's all pumping a certain email address?
Yeah, you can email. I'll put it in the chat. You can email DC Flood Task Force.
DPO operation. Okay.
Oh, I think someone's on another call. Vermecia.
No, I'm trying because some reason these the emails are not getting to everybody, and with this male employee, I need to
Stephanie, are you able to mute whoever's talking?
Ms. Barton, I think you're.
Yeah, I think we got it.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think I got it.
All right. Yeah. Vermecia, go ahead.
yeah. I think so. It seems like it builds off of some of the work that Bill Lascare was had kind of started here at our agency before he left. But is that the thought, like to GIS, building off of that and utilizing the open data, but it would be close to district partners for us to utilize, as EJ was kind of going through and also Meredith was sharing? Is that the thought, this kind of exercise?
I think, which one are you talking about? The centralized database?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thought here, and clearly this needs more, like, I think there's a bunch of agencies that recognize that this is something we should do, but exactly how to do it, we need to figure out, and that'll be, kind of some offline conversations. But the thought is that, right now, a call goes into DC Water. DC Water has their own tracking system for it. A call comes into DOE, it gets, in our own spreadsheet, and, same thing with DDOT. And so, having a way to put all of those in the same place and to both track these complaints and help us like manage what to do with them, but also I think eventually, like you're saying, put them in a GIS map and be able to show where they are, I think would be really useful for all of us. So I would say more to come on that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move to the next one, which is somewhat related. We have an action plan for resolving drainage complaints. And many of you may know that the the DC Drainage Committee has existed for many years, at least I think 20 years from my knowledge and history of it. And it's an informal group that of hardy, dedicated employees trying to resolve drainage issues around the city and come up with solutions. But we think it can benefit from some more formalization, some more formal data tracking, and standard operating procedures, as well as information for the public. So one of the biggest challenges is there are a lot of situations where the resolution maybe take a long time, may be very complicated, may take a long time, or there may not be a resolution, or it may be a private property owner responsibility. So we want to prepare public outreach information to let the public know, if you have this problem, who can you contact? If you have this problem, who's likely to be responsible for it? If you have this problem, it may be the property owner's responsibility. So there's a number of items that we're working to establish through this action plan. I don't have a secondary slide that shows these details, so I'm just going to talk to this. So we want to develop standard operating procedures so that when any agency receives a complaint, and this is typically going to be DC Water, DDOT, DOEE, sometimes DCRA gets involved with these as well between property owners. So standard operating procedures for agency members who are working on these complaints to investigate and refer to other agency. We want to formalize this committee most likely through an interagency MOA or MOU to establish what agencies are responsible for what and how that interaction and agreement can happen. Make sure there's agency staff who can support these investigations. Establish a data and tracking system, which is very similar or possibly the same as what we just talked about on the interior flood mapping. Let's see. Making sure that all of these complaints are followed up on and that complainants are responded to as well. And then also obtain funding where that's needed. So the number of efforts trying to improve the process, make clear lines of responsibility, establish clear agency responsibilities, and make sure all the complaints have closure. So that's where we're going with this, this action plan. Nick, anything to add on here?
No, well, I guess just to say that, I think this one and the last one where you heard about the centralized database, I mean, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Kind of leveraging the conversations that have started in the task force, and we need to kind of like finish it out. So this action plan is really more kind of setting what needs to happen that you laid out, and then and then the final report would just be a way to hold task force members accountable for like playing their part in getting this done.
Any questions from the group? Okay. I think we can go to the next.
Yeah. All right. I think we're gonna. Oh yeah, I forgot this one was on here. Okay, P Street levee closure. I can do this one. So yeah, the photo you see here, this is you're standing on P Street and you're looking at 2nd Street. The brick wall is Fort McNair in the background, and then there's Syfax Gardens housing complex to your left. So that is the location of where the P Street levee closure needs to go. If you go to the next slide. So right now, well, so if there were a 500-year flood, there needs to be this closure installed at P Street and 2nd Street Southwest. Right now, there's no district agency that has this responsibility, so this is a gap that we need to fix. And if we didn't have a closure there, there would be a big flooded area in Southwest DC. So what this action plan is doing is it's proposing kind of two actions. One is a short-term action, which is to put out a contract and hire a contractor who, when we call, they will come out and install a sandbag or a jersey barrier or some kind of flood closure that meets Army Corps requirements. And so that way we don't have to have the equipment and assets and manpower. We don't have to figure that out in terms of existing DC staff. Long term, the Army Corps is currently undergoing a levee system wide report. So this is the levee system that is called the Potomac Park Levee System. It stretches from all the way to the National Mall, the 17th Street levee closure, and then part of it is this P Street levee closure. So they're doing a larger assessment. And then after we see that assessment, we may want to consider installing some kind of post and panel closure similar to what we have at 17th Street. And if we go that route, we'll need to design it, get it built, and then have agreements amongst different district agencies about who is going to install it if we get a warning from the Weather Service. So the action plan kind of outlines those different actions, and we'll be working on those in the next couple of years. So now I'm going to pass it to HCMA to close us out with the last 3 action plans here.
Actually, Nick,
Yes.
hi, I just wanted to mention, did you, I don't know if DPW wanted to weigh in a little bit about the P Street levy work.
Sure.
I know that in the background, they had mentioned a couple of things in another meeting, so I didn't know if they wanted to weigh in here. If not, you can keep going forward.
Yeah, happy to have DPW weigh in. They've been great partners along with HCMA and the Army Corps in trying to figure out this process.
Hey, Monte and Nick, this is Melvin Smith, DPW. Nick's presentation of the plan was something that we agreed upon from our on-site walkthrough. We're hoping that we can get continued support with this plan. A lot of effort is going to go into making sure that we can support everything that needs to happen based on the short-term plan, the long-term plan, and any type of more immediate actions that need to happen. I think we've come a long way in identifying where the gaps lie as it relates to the P Street levy. So I think we're pretty good to go. We don't have anything additional to add. And at this time, there are no immediate concerns.
Great, thanks, Melvin. All right, so I'm gonna pass it to the HCMA team. I don't hear anybody yet, so if you're talking, you are on mute.
Oh, hey, Nick, this is Andy Worrell. I've got one of the action updates, but I wasn't sure who's
doing 8.5.
Can we make sure that Wes is a panelist?
Okay. So Stephanie, while we try and get Wes on, we can maybe skip to the next one and then come back to 8.5.
He's been moved over.
I'm on.
All right, he's on. That was super quick. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks. Can we go back to the first slide? Apologize for my camera. My computer is not working correctly right now. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So 8.5, process for residents to report flood problems, has been moved around a bit. I know before it was maybe 9.3, but it's been moved around. But I think it's landed here. But the gist of it is to create a centralized place for residents to report flooding problems. And I think we've talked to our partners at DC Water, and we've talked to additional partners where we're at least we might not have a centralized place, but we have a process for residents to report flood problems in a more streamlined way.
So HSEMA has led this effort with conjunction with DC Water and with OUC. And they have set up this diagram, if you can see on your right, where residents would call 311. 311 call takers would have a database where they store residents' concerns and issues relating to flooding. That will be sent over to DC Water. DC Water would investigate the issue and then follow up with the resident and close out the case. We're working on, it still needs work on the data collection piece where we can share data to other agencies so that if it's not a problem, if it's not a DC Water issue, other agencies can pick up where they would think the issue falls into their lap. But you can go to the next slide. So we established an interagency project group comprising of the key stakeholders to streamline the pathway for flood reporting. As you all know, this initiative stemmed out of the September 10th flooding that happened in the district, where we had an influx of calls coming from different parties. The need to collect data and streamline the process was identified. And like I said before, the status now that we have built is 311 call takers will take the call, share the information with DC Water, report a problem, and they would track those calls for residents. Next slide. This is basically the equity implementation is to so district and private agencies can identify issues of improvement in the call process and tracking residents' date for timely response. That's to focus on vulnerable communities who are most affected. The timeline is current, and I don't actually know the budget yet. We can talk about those things. Any questions?
Hey, Wes, this is
I have a question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have a question too.
Just real quick. This is Victor with DOEE, and actually, I think that was Salil that was speaking up. This question is actually prompting you as well. If we could go back to the first slide for this action plan. Okay, great. So I'm reflecting back on Salil's presentation for, I believe it was processing drainage complaints and how DC Water triages them. And again, this is kind of prompting Salil to respond. In this diagram, which HSEMA has been helpful in helping to organize this over many months, so much appreciative for that work. But Salil, in this diagram, where it identifies DC Water, is this reflective of a point where DC Water would triage drainage complaints as well? Again, referring to the presentation you all gave in August.
Victor, good question. And Wes, do you mind if I jump in there? So.
Not at all, so good.
Also, Salil, I just wanted to mention that DISB also had a plan that they just presented on that too. So if DISB wants to comment as well.
Okay, why doesn't DISB comment and I'll follow up on the closeout. Philip, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Our proposal didn't discuss consumer complaints necessarily. What we were discussing is a program to educate and empower residents. However, we do have a consumer complaint process already where water damage complaints are received by the agency and worked within 45 days of receipt. So we have a program in place that addresses water damage complaints. Now, flood insurance, specifically flood-related complaints, are handled by FEMA. So it seems like there would be, two work streams. One where we have water damage consumer complaints that DISB would address, And if this is flood-related consumer complaints, it seems like HZMA would address those in a different work stream.
Right, Philip. So I think there's a different for these. EJ, you want to jump in?
Well, actually, some of the questions that I had were or are already raised. Just to generalize my question, one is what is this focused on when we say flooding? What kind of are we also considering the drainage issues? One. The other thing is, how does this work along with the proposed centralized database that DOE is trying to work on? Would it be some sort of a redundancy? And the third question I have is, all in all, we're trying to not finger point on one another among the agencies. I mean, when issues arise. So through this process, what I see is the complaints come and they go to DC Water. From DC Water, how is it connected to the other agencies before any kind of response is given to the public back? Because it makes us look really bad when we single-handedly respond to the public.
Great point, EJ. So let me wrap them all up. So this is the reason some of these questions might be up here, because we actually combined two different plans, and that'll get explained when we flush this out. So this input is really helpful. It's okay. 365 days a year, we may get 1 or 2 days in the entire year when there is a flood emergency. Hopefully not more, but let's say 3. That still means over 99% of the days that there are issues in the city, it's not an emergency. So the way it's set up is issues related to sewer or water, the calls come to the DC Water Command Center and they get handled over there. Those are not emergencies. Now, what September 10, 2020 taught us, which is the genesis for this task force, is when you have a flood of calls, and especially on September 10th, when we were not expecting that big a storm, when it happened all of a sudden, you overwhelm the command center with calls. And what that means is you have residents who have an issue are waiting for way too long. So Wes and the entire HCMA has been a great partner in working with us to work a system out where if we hit a trigger on a wait time on a command center calls, those calls will get routed to 311. So that 311 can then process it and residents don't have to wait for a while. That's a MOU, MOA that's in place right now, and the details are being worked out. And that, when it goes, I expect it to be ready by the end of this year, is going to be tremendously helpful for future emergencies. Coming back to EJ's question, when the command center gets a call, and even if it goes to 311, it eventually gets routed to the command center. The command center looks at the content of the call and they create what's called an investigation work order. Because you really, especially during an emergency, but also at all times, you don't want to dispatch a workforce to a problem who show up and they don't have the tools to solve it. A, it's not productive, and B, it doesn't serve the resident, and C, it creates a terrible impression of the service they're providing. So what the command center does is it looks at, and they're experienced folks there in the command center. They look at the problem, they anticipate what the issue is, they pull up data from the historical database on other problems in that area. And then they send an investigation work order out to the sewer services for the correct crew to go out and investigate. Now, majority of the time, almost all the time, the crew that shows up resolves the problem and it's over. There are instances where the crew show up and they say, this is not a DC water issue. We really can't solve this. They come back to the command center. The command center then calls back the resident and says, please call a different agency. That process is something we're trying to avoid. And like EJ pointed out, it almost seems like finger pointing. It's something we really want to avoid. It also means a resident has to make multiple calls to resolve an issue. So the process we're putting in place, and it's not close to be done, but it'll be done by the end of the task force, is when we determine that that issue cannot be solved by DC Water, but it belongs to a different agency to solve, the command center will route it directly to that agency so that the resident itself doesn't have to make multiple calls. EJ, does that help?
I think so. Yes.
And we need to work out the details for sure.
Yeah, we need to. Yeah.
Yeah, Salil, I have one follow-up, and thank you for the explanation. So it looks like 311 is used to handle overflow situations.
And there may be individuals that may just call 311 because the 311 number is easier to remember.
Right. And that's clear. However, it looks like whether it's overflow or that typical 90% where it's non-emergency, DC Water still sort of has this triaging that you described in August, where if it's not a DC Water quote unquote issue, the resident is, I guess, forwarded to the appropriate agency. Is that the case?
Well, the resident won't forward it. The issue.
Okay. The issue. Okay. Okay. But it's the case, not whether it's the 10% or 3 days a year where it's not, where it's an emergency, or the remainder of the year, emergency, or vice versa, rather.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, the third piece that was mentioned, Victor, and that was how is this information showing up on a database? And that's something we're working out with DOE, because the information should show up on a central database. Our IT and DOE is going to work together on that. So whether it's a DDOT issue, DOE issue, DCRA issue, DC Water, there should be a central place where all these show up on the map that was just shown a while back.
So the Drainage Committee reporting and the centralized reporting could actually, the reporting of those two, so the Drainage Committee reporting, or the drainage issue reporting, I should say, and emergency reporting could be identified in the same flow diagram, where you would see the 311 piece introduced for overflow, but the rest of the flow is essentially the same. Is that I'm sorry, I just want to make sure we get that. Is that correct?
Conceptually, that is correct. What we're trying to do is create a direct link between our database and whatever mapping system there is, so that as soon as we enter it, it shows up there. While issues that go to the Drainage Committee are issues that are more complicated, and they are far fewer than what get reported. So this shouldn't be more than 1 or 2% of total issues. So the Drainage Committee, issues showing up at the Drainage Committee take several days, maybe longer, to resolve. So they would also be translated, but that the way they show up on the map may be a different route. On the workflow, it seems the same, but the mechanism will be different. Does that make sense, Victor? Because those aren't automated. That's a manual process.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Salil, there were 2 messages in the chat. Meredith Upchurch, if you want to come off mute and give your remark, as well as Ramesia.
I think it's been covered. We discussed how there's difference between the emergency and non-emergency processing, and this is the process for the emergency.
Yeah, that makes it clear. Yes.
I tell you, this is very encouraging seeing all the teams work together rather than each one working independently on this one issue.
I think that this is still HCMA presenting, so is it Vermesia or is it back to Andrew or?
Hi, Monty. That'll be me, Carolyn. Hi.
Oh, hi, Carolyn. Hi, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Carolyn Mejia, HCMA Office of the Chief of Staff. So talking about our early severe weather warning system for residents. So what we're looking at here is hoping to utilize a system that we currently have in place that's managed by HCMA Alert DC that residents are already familiar with. I'm so sorry. But using a system that folks are already familiar with to expand on as our system for early warnings should there be severe weather, whether that is flooding or otherwise. So if we can go to the next slide. So we'll be using AlertDC, which is managed through Everbridge, to expand the capabilities that we currently have specific to early warning systems to meet the needs of the district. HCMA would lead the effort. So our plan would be to review the templates that are currently used for whether it's flooding response as a notification ahead of an event or once an event has already happened, review the templates that we currently have in place, and then bring those back to the task force and coordinate with the folks here to kind of review the templates, expand on them, and provide our suggestions back to HCMA. The senior leadership team and the Division of Operations would then be able to determine the best course of action to implement those templates and any recommendations that we might have that they feel are appropriate back into the flow of messages that come out of the system. AlertDC is already budgeted through HCMA as part of a regional contract, so there would be no additional cost to continue using the system, which allows us to better continue with the process without having to consider any budgetary restraints that might be put on us to then look at a newer system. If I could look at the next slide, please. Oh, if I could get the next slide. Yep, there we go. So this is just the timeline again. So what we're looking at is being able to, once this action plan is approved, being able to go in and look at the AlertDC templates that are already in place, bring those back and assess those to determine our updates, recommendations that we want to provide, socialize those back to the HCMA team, and then whichever ones or whatever recommendations are approved would then be implemented over a year time frame to ensure that everything is working as expected, that there are no additional changes that should be made, any additional suggestions during a 6-month, year-long review period after those templates have been implemented. Next slide, please. I believe there might be one more. Yes. In terms of equity considerations, AlertDC currently is already set up and operational, but there's definitely room for improvement. We would need to obviously consider how we want to deliver those messages to ensure that they're reaching everyone, not just a text message, but what are options for email or phone calls that can be made through the system that we currently have to better reach residents. Expanding the message delivery language and formats, again, wanting to ensure that we're accessible to as many people as possible. How can we utilize the language access line that we have in the district or any other options that we have to expand the accessibility language-wise of the messages that are being sent, and also consider additional budgetary constraint we would need to consider to kind of expand the knowledge of the existing program so that we have additional buy-in and are also being clear on the socialization of this system as an early warning system for the district instead of just a general messaging system that's specific to emergencies at large, but that this is going to be utilized specifically for flooding as well. But that's everything from me. Questions or feedback from anyone?
Carolyn, this is Salil. This is excellent. I love the work HCMA does. Any thoughts on including or embedding a message for basement dwellers? I mean, we don't have to answer that right now, but that would be great because that's a section of population. Should we have a major storm like Ida was? That's the biggest risk.
Yeah, that's something that we could definitely consider once we're looking at the templates that are already in place and expanding those. Being able to consider any specific messaging that we would want to send that would expand on that. So that's definitely something that could be included during that review and recommendations period.
And in the flood exercise that was yesterday, that was also very productive. One of the things that came out that I did not realize, there was a hospital online that said that when they discharge their patients, if they're mobility impaired, they register with FEMS so that fire departments are aware of their mobility issues. That may also be a database that's helpful to have to notify them in case of emergencies such as flooding.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something that we can consider incorporating as part of the recommendations, just how that messaging is getting across and how we want to target specific messaging to different populations. AlertDC does allow us to it works basically on a subscription service. So folks sign up for the messages, but during that process, they can choose specifically what kinds of messages they want to receive. So it might be an option for us to kind of expand the way that folks are identifying themselves when they sign up for any specific messages that might be important to them in terms of language or access that they might need.
Oh, it's awesome. Thank you.
And
Yeah,
I'll
of
chime in
course.
here too, Salil. The HCMA, actually the entire district, is responding to a settlement agreement around access and functional needs in the community, populations with disabilities and sort of specific needs that they have during emergencies. And one of the key parts of that settlement agreement is to revise AlertDC and our other alert systems. So that's a conversation we are actively having. And if other folks who are part of this process want to have any part of the conversation about disability access and functional needs and things that you're working on that might be related to some of that, please reach out to me right now. I'm temporarily leading that, and we are working on filling the vacancy and having somebody permanently in that role.
Oh, that's, I'm sorry that it's a settlement and you have to go through this, but it's fortuitous. The timing works out.
Yeah, no, it's work that we are happy to be doing. It just happens to be spelled out in a settlement agreement.
Thank you.
All right, and I think if we advance to the next slide, there we go. The this action item 9.2 is actually an update to the procedures and agency roles for emergency flooding response. And we're excited because as Salil talked about, and as many of the members of this group have participated in, we're in the midst of doing that update process right now. And we have many of these participating agencies such as DPW, DOEE, DDOT, DC Water, NPS, the National Park Service, Corps of Engineers, and DC Silver Jackets really making efforts to update and ensure that we have a flood response and that it accurately reflects the operational reality that we see here in the district. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I'd like to highlight is part of our action plan is we identified that HCMA was going to be conducting a two-part tabletop exercise. We've just concluded that this past Tuesday, and I'm happy to announce that over 100 participants from district, federal, DOD, stakeholders, NGOs participated in both sessions. And during those sessions, we tested or we actually walked through mitigation efforts, post-incident recovery operations, continuity of operations, continuity of governments. And the intention that we've outlined is that we're going to use that as a part of the Homeland Security exercise and evaluation process. We're going to use those products to inform and enhance our district-wide flood planning products and our preparedness. More specifically, the outcome of those two sessions are going to result in a corrective actions and an after action improvement plan so that we can build and sustain capabilities and maintain readiness for emergency flood response. We were, as was already previously discussed during the P Street levy discussion with Nick Bernard, we actually benefited from the opportunity to have that walkthrough conduct concurrent to these tabletop exercises. So many of the members that were part of that exercise, the exercise group, actually went out and physically walked and saw the location and some of the barriers or challenges that we would need to address in a response plan in order to address that. One of the other things that we'd like to do is any new or emerging outcomes, particularly from this flood task force, those also have to be incorporated. Anything such as the updates to alerts, any sort of emergency flood reporting procedures, any sort of changes to operations for waterproofing, which includes the installation of post and beam style levees and barriers, as well as sandbagging operations, and perhaps even the installation of concrete barriers at the P Street. We've got to make sure that we include all of these new and emerging practices into that plan. If we can move to the next slide, we also have the focus on equity is, of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but it's focusing on the flooding in vulnerable communities. We have the strategy for the district that is going to be rolling out our emergency management strategy, and part of that is the alignment to equity and equitable outcomes for underserved communities and vulnerable populations. So part of that will influence a focus on equitable outcomes and identifying areas of improvements. Some of those were just previously discussed. Alerts and new methodologies for connecting these alerts to underserved communities or perhaps disabled and functional access need communities. The timeline for this is that we're currently in the midst of maintaining and updating our plans. In some of the other exercises that we've conducted, we've been able to show snapshots of some of the flood plan tools and products that we utilize that allow HCEMA to conduct incident management coordination with our planning partners and our public, our first responders, public safety first responder community. So that speaks to the tabletop exercise, that focused on mitigation, or as I was, the first tabletop exercise focused on those post-recovery topics of continuity of operations of government, and then the second TTX focused on that just-in-time mitigation efforts. The Preparedness Bureau is going to utilize the local budget. Currently, we have a funding level that allows us to conduct this threat and hazard incident specific type of planning, and it's part of the district's emergency management preparedness system. Any questions?
No, thanks, Andy. And it's cool for this action plan. We're actually able to incorporate some of the recent exercises. So that's really nice. All right. So those are all the action plans that we are formally going to release for member comment at the end of the week. But I wanted to bring one more up. It's not an action plan, but it's something I think task force members have to think about. Yesterday evening, I was at the Eastland Gardens Civic Association meeting, and they are a neighborhood that basically the only way out of their neighborhood is through the underpass on Nanny Helen Burroughs, going under the 295. And this area floods quite often. And I explained that we have plans at DOE for kind of long-range neighborhood scale infrastructure, blue-green infrastructure, those type of things, and we have flood smart homes to help their community. And they were very gracious and nice and said, "That's great, but what are you going to do the next time it rains? Because this intersection is going to flood again." And they suggested things like, making sure the trash is picked up in this area, cleaning the catch basins, additional temporary pumps. And I bring this up to say that I think this task force has done so far a really awesome job thinking broadly about the systems and processes that we need to change and thinking long term. I think there is still some room for us to focus on immediate actions for places like Nanny Helen Burroughs underpass, for places like the Rhode Island underpass. Like, what are we going to do if it floods tomorrow? So just highlighting that. I know I'll be trying to work with some colleagues in DPW and DC Water to figure out what exactly, like how we can leverage the fact that we're all here as part of this flood task force, which is, I think, a big accomplishment. But how do we leverage that to kind of apply it to some of these specific problems that require immediate action? So this is more just a heads up, and I think we'll try and find a way to incorporate this in the next few meetings and in the final report, but not quite sure exactly what this looks like. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Monty.
Yes, thank you, Nick, and thank you for bringing that up. I did want to offer a little bit of a compliment too for this flood task force. The fact that we consider equity as such a priority, and it's really just natural, but we do emphasize it as a point of purpose. I just want to say thank you for that to everybody, because it is truly important to make sure as our city grows and changes, and we have all these new people moving in, that we, one, take care of the communities that are established and have been around for a long time, and not forget about them because the infrastructure needs to be improved there. And then two, also making sure that the city is resilient for everyone. So this is just, I just want to give a little mark of praise for everyone and how they've presented equity as a very important priority for our planning here. I also want to introduce now for our closing remarks, Director Tommy Wells, who's been great with keeping us on task and making sure that we don't lose the point, which is making sure the budget is what we really put our work towards, so that we can make sure that all these plans actually materialize and get implemented. So, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Monty. I just want to say this is an impressive amount of work. I think everybody that just went through the presentation and the choices and the voting and just the whole piece of work, it's a great service for the District of Columbia. It's from what I've heard from other, not that we're in competition, but we're one of the first cities to do this at this comprehensive level. So we all know that we're flooding. It's going to get worse. Climate change is going to continue to get worse. And so you're part of being on the front end of protecting our great city. So thank you for all this work. We kind of go into the next phase of getting it funded, getting this incorporated into the plans for the city. But I'm very proud of this, and it'll be an honor to move this plan and these projects forward. Certainly the budget items to the city administrator, as we are operating under the city administrator's aegis for this task force, for him to receive your recommendations. So give yourselves a pat on the back. Looks good. And always good to partner with DC Water, but everyone else really stepped forward from the DC government side. Thank you. And I think the last thing is that this exercise really reminds everyone that something like flooding disasters is a shared responsibility. It's not just DC Water, not just DOEE. It's a shared responsibility. And, you certainly showed that. And thank you, everybody, again, for your work to making this such an important piece of work for the city to go forward and be resilient. Thank you, Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. We appreciate those words of encouragement and focus. And we are going to wrap up our meeting. So Meredith Upchurch from DOE will give us some final thoughts and maybe a little bit of homework, and then I'll be back on to close us out. Meredith?
Actually, I think I was gonna do this.
Yep, Nick's gonna take this.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. It is Nick. Those are my notes. I
That's all
always
right.
default to Meredith. I'm sorry. So Nick, please.
Yeah, no, just to quickly wrap up. So here we are, in blue, September 21st. We've approved the final approval of batch 1. And so just so you can see the remaining 2 meetings for the task force in November, and then 1 in January, and then final approval of batch 2 and batch 3 respectively. So that's kind of where we're going. And then yeah, next steps. So like I mentioned, at the end of this week, we will send out Word document links to all of the task force members so that you can you can read in a little bit more detail and make comments and suggestions. And you'll have about a month to do that. And then whoever is the lead agency on that action plan will incorporate comments. And then in the November meeting, we'll present, we will vote to release batch 3 for public comment. So that's batch 3. So batch 2, also towards the end of this week, probably early next week, we will be sending out those emails to ANCs and interested stakeholders that they can comment on the batch 2 plans, which we just approved for public comment. So we will get those on the website, and again, email, and then as task force members, as you get these emails, please forward to any folks that you think might be interested, so that we can spread the word. And yeah, I think that is it. I think we just got the upcoming task force meetings. So yeah, take it away, Monty.
That's a good point. Nick, just making sure, Dr. Hewitt, your team, we will talk to you offline about making sure we're getting on your list to disseminate this information to an even broader cast of public members for comment and review. So as we close up our meeting, thank you so much, Nick. As we close up our meeting, we have some upcoming task force dates for folks to keep on their calendar. Our next residential resilience action team meeting is on October 11th. We have governance coordination on October 14th. There's been some internal talks that we might put both of those meetings together. So please pay attention to your inbox for any scheduling changes. But for right now, this is what we have planned. And then we will have our task force meeting, our full task force meeting. Again, we've noted it before, November 16th. The more the merrier. We love having the directors on the line so that they can place their votes as well as their full team. We've appreciated the conversation today. And I think that's it. Nick H. I think that's our. So with that, I want to thank everybody again. It's just beautiful to live in a city where folks are willing to talk and be efficient and coordinate and take the ego off the table and put forth the importance of the residents. So we've accomplished that today, and we continue to put the resident first in all of our meetings and how we proceed. So I want to thank you all as agency folks and participants on the task force for your time and your energy. And with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.